Hey, beautiful people, and welcome to another episode of the State of Flow podcast with me, Lena Kaliyah. I'm really honored to have you here once again, and I hope everyone is having a fantastic week. And so, this episode today is going to be all about how mental health and gut health relate, how stress directly affects our digestive system, and how our emotions impact the physical mechanisms and functioning of our body and vice versa, because we know everything works in a synergy with us being spiritual beings in a physical world down here. So let's dive into it. Obviously, we know that stress impacts us holistically. And what I say so often to my clients on this podcast all the time is that no matter what we experience, whether it's childhood trauma or things going on at work, a hectic work environment, relationship stuff, whether it's junk food or chemical environmental exposure and so forth, they're all just different avenue of stress. No matter what you want to call it, they all trigger the same response in our body, which is our fight and flight response, and that directly impacts our digestive system. And so I also say quite often that mental health and gut health are actually directly linked. So did you know, for example, that about 70 to 80% of your entire immune system and your lymph actually surround your gut? And that is because, if you think about it, because our gut is where through our mouth and taking in things, that's basically the main gate through which toxins can enter the body. Of course, the skin as well, through the skin products, body products we use and what we absorb, but obviously what we take in food wise and through our mouth has the biggest impact on our body. So most of your immune system is actually located directly around your gut. And I want to dive a little bit deeper into how certain emotions directly affect us and what response they do cause in the body. And also acknowledge that just like everything else has root causes. I talked in the last episode about the 6 stages of disease according to Ayurveda. If you haven't had a listen yet, do go back. It's all information extracted from a free Elevate Your State webinar, which is still available for you to grab. Basically, and this essentially works the same way with our emotions. We feel all these different things, and quite often it's not the emotion we're feeling right now is merely a symptom of a root cause emotion, and that usually is vulnerability. That's a big topic. There are amazing people out there like Brené Brown and so forth who really specialize on understanding those emotions and bringing them closer to us and allowing us to express them in healthy ways and empower ourselves through them. But you find that vulnerability essentially is the mother of emotions alongside another 2 emotions, but they also do kind of draw back to vulnerability, if you ask me, and they are anxiety and shame. And so what they all have in common is that they're kind of a social taboo. Just over the last decade or so, as mental health numbers have really exploded and gone through the roof, not in a good way, we have developed some publicity around anxiety and depression as being some of the major mental health concerns most people experience at some stage in their life. I think by now it's in most Western countries, including America and Australia, 1 out of 2 adults who have suffered anxiety, depression or depression symptoms at some stage in their life. So by now we have built up a little bit of social resilience towards it. And anxiety is a big topic. There are lots of people of different avenues that specialize in the treatment and management of these kind of symptoms. And so it has gained a little bit more, understanding in our society, and we have developed tools for it and so forth. So anxiety is almost out of the taboo zone. But when it comes down to vulnerability and shame, they are still emotions that we commonly struggle to deal with and to express in a healthy manner. And that's what's actually leading to a number of imbalances, not just emotionally, mentally, but also physically. And I want to get a little bit deeper into that. it's very interesting how you might have seen charts in the past or read about how certain emotions have their seat and their place in the body. For example, TCM and Ayurveda refer to anger having its seat in the liver due to liver heat, which is the fire element, and the liver is a fire organ. And you might have heard similar things along those lines. I know that reflexology and so forth is concerned with that as well, how emotions have different seats, and that's what's relating to what we're going to go into today. So let's start at vulnerability and say that vulnerability is the mother of emotions alongside shame and anxiety. And like I already said, they are not yet socially so accepted, and they are still very taboo, which makes it unconsciously, unless we're obviously aware of it, hard for many of us to firstly recognize those emotions and then therefore deal with them. If we don't recognize them, we also can't deal with them. And so what happens when we don't recognize vulnerability or shame as the root, the initial emotion, it actually spirals into other things. And so like what I mentioned, our physical symptoms usually have a sequence. They're sequential. They have a root cause. Quite often the symptoms we feel are just an extension of something that has happened before that we have not yet taken into account or been aware of. It's the same with our emotions. And essentially, vulnerability starts in our root chakra area. That's where this emotion arises. That's where its seat is. So it impacts our pelvic cavity, and pelvis, our hips. And so this whole root chakra area. And if you think about it, the color of the root chakra is red, and it's a very earthy quality. And it is very much concerned with our basic survival needs. And so whenever you find yourself in, stressful situations and hardships in life that have to do with your finances, with your living situation, with your basic relationship, not necessarily romantically, but how do you see yourself within that tribe that the human race is, and so forth. So all those basic human needs relate to our very lowest power center, our root chakra. And so this is where vulnerability starts to express itself as well. So you will find on a physical level that it might have all those things I'm saying is if we're not aware of it and if we are not taking action, then these kind of things like vulnerability may manifest in our lower organs like your small intestines and large intestines and so forth, and some sort of physical symptoms. So let's presume that we're not recognizing vulnerability here where it starts, because it can be so hard for many of us to own up to that vulnerability is a thing. There's this whole stigma of I don't do vulnerability, or I have a thick skin, I don't care about vulnerability going on. But let's dive a little deeper into our emotions to understand that actually everything does come down to exactly that. So if we're not recognizing vulnerability here in the seat of the pelvis, it starts to spiral up, essentially. Energy moves upwards. I'm also a somatic body worker and Reiki master and so forth, and so work with those metaphysical healing practices as well. And I've always believed, and I do find that in my practice over and over, that energy that needs to be released from our body is rising up into the ether and not down. And so does everything that's accumulating in our body. It's starting from the bottom and it's building up into its own crown and expanding from there. So if we're not recognizing vulnerability, it will do exactly that, and it will move further up through our physical body into the next physical area, which starts to be our kind of solar plexus around the navel area and so forth. And because we haven't yet recognized this emotion, but life goes on. So, instead of releasing it and letting it go, we're actually piling up new things on top of it and stuffing this vulnerability down. So it starts to morph like disease does, like a virus does. And it usually turns into different emotions. That's where I find often shame and anxiety comes in, fear, things like that. And now I'm sure we all have experienced the feeling of anxiety at some stage in our lives. And you would know how it feels in your body. And very likely it shows itself as this tension in your abdomen. There's stomach tightness, this numbness with little tingle things going on in your stomach, but that's usually kind of the location of where you feel anxiety, fear, nervousness, those kind of things. So again, we got to recognize that that's not the root emotion. That's actually just the build-up of this vulnerability that we did not honor and accept yet and work on. And so it spirals into the next thing, which is anxiety. And on a physical level, anxiety, emotions, and stress can really shut down our entire digestive process and reduce circulation to the digestive tract, because our sympathetic nervous system is now turned on and the parasympathetic nervous system is turned off. Sorry, it's a bit of a tongue breaker for me sometimes with my German mouth. So it literally creates tension on this physical level. And another way I like to explain it with is, like I mentioned before, it's an impact of stress that makes us feel those feels, those emotions like vulnerability, that then spirals into other negative emotions. And so stress affects our body physically with tension. That's because we are getting into the fight and flight mode. Our body is literally readying us to run to survive from the tiger and mobilize us, like flight mode, right? Or fight mode, to really engage through our muscles. And so it literally draws the circulation out of our digestive tract into our limbs and our muscles that we need to move on. Meanwhile, if we were still to digest smoothly while we're trying to run for our life, it's just stealing vital energy of us that we would need to put into our limbs to run faster, correct? But these days, this tiger we used to run from, this life-threatening event, has turned into all day long stresses that might come in the shape of a stressful work environment, childhood trauma, a relationship, having 5 kids, even though you love kids, but being constantly engaged and, doing the things creates a stress response. And now we spend so much more time in there. That creates so much more tension in our body, and that therefore shuts our digestive system down or really compromises our digestive qualities. And that's why you find probably almost every one of us has digestive issues, and quite often we normalize the symptoms. Like you might have been gassy for years or bloated every day for months or years. That's your new normal, and you just kind of accept it. Well, my body is just broken or not comfortable, and it is what it is. I'm just getting on with it, and we start to normalize the symptoms that way, because like I talked about in our last episode, we're not recognizing our symptoms as the messenger. And so yes, that's essentially how this tightness or distension in our abdomen can be created, and very often is, by our unresolved emotions. And that's the key, unresolved emotions. It ties in with what I said. All our symptoms, including the emotional and mental ones we're getting, are the messenger of that something is off. If we don't resolve that situation, it will just manifest and expand into something bigger. So ultimately, vulnerability as the mother of our emotions is a sign of impending trauma. So there's something in our memory that is quite uncomfortable. And again, I talked about that stress can have different avenues, and so does trauma. It can be a very complex thing. It can be a micro trauma that our body will still hold on to. So even like being vulnerable is your response to not feeling 100% comfortable or safe in a situation in any way, shape or form. It can come over you. And public speaking, that can be a form of trauma you're holding on to if you're not aware of it. If you have this fright of public speaking, that causes trauma to your body. It can be a car accident, but it can also be things like someone having said something super mean to you when you were 12 and a little bit overweight or something. They are all different types of trauma that trigger the same stress response, and that cause ultimately vulnerability. And so because we have very little tools for expressing and dealing with this vulnerability, like I already mentioned, it often spirals into something else. and then into those physical symptoms in our abdomen and so forth. And so if we still don't then recognize our emotions here when we're in this state of abdominal tension and discomfort here, and where vulnerability has transformed into anxiety, into fear, into shame, then those emotions are this energy that we're compressing, but meanwhile it's accumulating. It starts to rise up even further through our physical body and through our energetic centers. So it fills up through our heart chakra and up into our throat chakra. And so into those areas, the kapha areas of the body, which are the lungs and the chest area. And so that's where quite often you find that people who have unresolved stuff within them that they haven't dealt with, that they also have a blockage in their throat chakra. I got my own, I'm talking of experience here. I had the biggest block in my throat chakra for years. Like I could never wear those high-rise, what do you call them? You know, the jumpers with the neck, high neck. Gosh, there's a word for it, but you know what I'm talking about. Or like tight scarves or tight necklaces. And or even as a kid when someone pulled my jacket up tight, like the zipper all the way up to the top, and I could just feel it moving against my throat. I felt so constricted. I had a major throat lock, like a big imbalance there. And then, you know, India has been a really big part of my own healing journey, and so I resolved a lot of things there. With yoga, for example, my teacher back then, as I was going through my own detox and clearing surface process, we actually used plow pose, where you have your chin against the chest, and it's this gentle inversion where you drop your legs up like a shoulder stand and then over your head. He got me into plow pose for minutes on end and got me to briefly deep through the throat and unlock all those things in the throat. And that was really, you know, I had this massive release through my throat chakra, through all the work I did, and that only uncovered that there was so much unresolved emotional crap that the throat chakra was essentially locking away. And that's what literally happens when you're not dealing with your emotions, and it starts to really tense up your body, and then it rises up into the chest, into the throat. And the throat chakra is all about self-expression. And so when you have those imbalances in your lower chakras, the lower areas of your body, and you're holding on to the unresolved stuff, it's not getting through that throat chakra, your neck area, which is this bottleneck. It creates this, you know, it's like a traffic jam essentially, and things just get stuck in there. And so if we're still not recognizing things here, then again, our emotions will just spiral or domino effect further down. And things like anger and irritation and frustration and jealousy and all sorts of those kind of emotions can arise. So, and then it will go on further and further, but eventually, which I find so interesting and relevant as well, is if we still don't catch ourselves out on the emotions while we're feeling them, then this energy will continue to rise, and it will ultimately rise up into our head. And that's when we then often start to intellectualize it. It's, you know, in the spiritual communities, there's this term for it, spiritual bypass, where you're just not feeling it, you're not integrating it, you're really bypassing it, and you're just trying to intellectually making sense of all those issues or problems that you're dealing with, and you kind of talk yourself out of them being real issues. But that's essentially just your mind playing a game around it, and you're not actually doing that work to integrate it. I also kind of define that a bit as spiritual ego, or it has to do with the spiritual ego a lot when you're bypassing. It's leading to this different ego consciousness, and there'll be a podcast episode coming on that. Once we start to intellectualize our emotions with our mind, you know, emotion means energy in motion. So emotion is something to be felt, and we can't make sense of that with our logical brain. So as soon as we try to, we're just creating a bit more of emotion. Things just get a little bit more messy. Also, emotion means energy in motion. So if we don't, I know I just repeated that was on purpose, energy in motion. So if we don't allow this energy to move on and be in motion, because we don't recognize it, and that's how we fail to allow it to move on, then it starts to accumulate. But it's meant to be in motion. So of course it's going to create imbalances within ourselves if it's not moving and not in motion, and it's stagnant and it's accumulating, and it's just going to create major tension in our body, like I already outlined. And so this is essentially how emotional health and physical health and mental health are just so interconnected, simply through that process and through the fact of that things like anxiety and vulnerability are the mother emotions to everything else, and that they directly affect our gut as their energy rises up, and we create tension through this fight and flight mode that's turning on the parasympathetic nervous system and drawing away the circulation from our gut. And so that's then the key point where those things start to leak into our physical realms and can actually manifest way more physical disease, because according to Ayurveda, all disease starts in the gut, and that has to do with how Ayurvedic anatomy defines the body. So of course we have all the different organs and systems and so forth, but Ayurveda works with, we could talk about this for hours, but keeping that short, a big concept is the 7 dhatus, the 7 tissues of the body. And so they are like limbs and interconnected and interdependent, but without the first dhatu or tissue, the last dhatu, which is your reproductive system or reproductive tissue, cannot be produced. So, and the first dhatu is rasa and rakta, so your blood and the plasma of the blood. It's not actually separated, it's flowing as one, but we separate those systems in Ayurveda. And your blood and your lymph is directly being created, and so therefore their quality is being determined by your digestion, by what you take in, but what you're able to digest, assimilate, and absorb. And so therefore it's directly related to the health of your digestive system. And so if your digestive system is already compressed because of this tension there due to those unresolved emotions, then you're not going to be able to produce high quality, oxygenized, nutritive, really juicy, odorous rich blood. And so because it's the blood that then moves through the body and starts to nourish all other tissues through your muscle tissue, your fat tissue, your nerve tissue, leading up your bones and so forth, through all those different layers, all those different dhatus, to the end into your reproductive tissue. And that's why, women's health is also something I focus on in my work, because it is interrelated. And you find that a lot of those women's health issues, and vice versa for men the same, so any kind of reproductive issues, and that does not mean to be, if fertility is not something you're currently concerned with, I am not, but I'm still concerned with my reproductive health. Fertility is basically just an outcome. If your reproductive tissues are healthy, then fertility is that ultimate goal. But you still, even though if you're not planning on producing any offspring, you still want to have healthy reproductive tissue for several reasons. And on that same note, if your reproductive system, if there's anything out of balance for women, it's always, so easy because we have our periods to track. And so if you're experiencing things like endometriosis and PMS and polycystic ovarian syndrome and things like that, any kind of reproductive imbalances, for men it's the same, having even things like low sperm count or premature ejaculation and things like that. They are all a sign of an imbalance in that reproductive system or tissue. And what that means, because I said the dhatus, the tissues, all rely on each other, and the reproductive is the last one. So if you have an imbalance in there, you can be surer than sure, that there's something imbalanced in all other tissues and in your digestion, which is that first that first process upon which all the other body tissues rely on. So there we go. We went a big loop back again to, just to show you how everything is totally interconnected. Absolutely. Like your emotions, your gut health, your reproductive health, and everything in between is directly interconnected, which is super duper interesting. And so essentially, what can we do? I don't want to make this episode too long. The number one thing to look after your gut, and therefore to look after all other body tissues and symptoms, and look after your mental health as well, is to actually start with your emotional and mental health. And it sounds so, and it is so simple in theory. Obviously, we are all humans, so we all go through shit at the time, and it will not be simple always. But in theory, it is that simple, that if you work on your emotions and create that opportunity of regular emotional release for yourself and circulating that energy, and therefore stabilize your mental health, that's the number one key to maintaining and optimizing and obtaining your physical health. So I just told you how emotions basically have this agenda, and how they have this, they work chronologically. And so there's a mother or root emotion to all other as so labeled negative emotions rising up. There are ways we can deal with that and prevent the uprise of those emotions. For example, I've had a few clients and heard of plenty of people that have problems with anger, and then they go to anger management courses, and then years later they still kind of have the same problem, and there's still something underlying that, and this anger management hasn't actually resolved the issue. And that is because anger is not actually an original emotion in that sense. Frustration isn't either, and irritation and jealousy. They are all ripple effects. They are all just extensions of vulnerability, fear, or anxiety and shame, which is so interesting. And so maybe learning about this was a massive eye-opener for me. So I hope you're taking something away from this as well, and you might already have some revelations about yourself. But obviously, number one thing we can do to kind of prevent those things by becoming more aware and embodying and becoming more in tune and in touch with our emotions and our mental and physical health and emotional health is through embodiment practice. And breathing is an incredibly powerful thing for that, whatever breathing techniques you use. I'm currently in my movement classes and things that I teach with clients. I teach things like Nadi Shodan, like your alternate nostril breathing, or really deep. Almost every class I always do deep diaphragmatic breathing or belly breathing, and that's an incredibly healing, therapeutic freaking breath. Hands down, guys. I told you how I had this throat chakra lock for like years, and that was just an extension of me actually having had a massive disconnect with my womb, with my ovaries, with my female power centers down there, due to some trauma that stemmed from abuse back then, and that caused trapped emotions because I never yet had the strength or the tools or even the ability to recognize what went on so I could deal with it at the time. So that has created all this tension and stagnation in all my lower power centers essentially, and has really disconnected me from those areas. So I worked with a lot of different amazing healers at the time, and did a lot of my own practice and self-study and self-inquiry. And one of the key things that helped me to reconnect to those centers was deep abdominal belly breathing. And so that's something any one of you can do at home or driving or when you're going to bed, and at any time really. And it sounds so simple. It is so simple, yet it is so profound, like most things in Ayurveda anyways. Make that your practice, deep belly breathing and abdominal breathing, and then bring in this practice of Mula Bandha, which is activating your root lock. And you can simply Google that. There will be plenty of tutorials and things on YouTube and things showing up on Google showing you how to do it. But essentially you're on an inhale engaging your pelvic muscle. It's basically the muscles that are between your genitals and your anus, and you kind of suck them in and up. So it's almost like you're holding you're trying to hold your bladder when you when you really have to go to the bathroom and you're just trying to hold it in. It's kind of like that. You just want to make sure that you're not clenching and creating super tension. You're just gently engaging, and you feel it lift inwards, like in towards the body and up towards the spine, and hold that for an inhale and release it on an exhale. That and deep belly breathing, making that a practice, is an incredible way to loosen up any excess tension in those lower body centers that don't need to be there. And it allows you to tap into and feel and understand your own vulnerability. There's no such thing as I don't do vulnerability. Without vulnerability, like, can you think of a single brave act, a single action that needs bravery and courage, that does not have to do with vulnerability, that does not require you to be vulnerable? I can't think of a single one. So vulnerability, it just is. It is part of being human. It is there, especially in the situations when we have to be the strongest, we also have to be vulnerable. And, it's still this, like I said, this kind of taboo topic in our society because we're so success driven and it's all about being better, being strong, having a thick skin, being successful, like having nothing face you. But expressing your emotions in a healthy manner is healthy. Not just healthy, it's just so essential, because otherwise it will lead to the absence of health, which is sickness in any way, mentally, physically, emotionally. So connecting with those lower centers through breath is helpful to firstly recognize when there is tension there, and then secondly dissolve any excess tension, and then observe how that affects your emotional state, especially when you feel things creep in like anger, frustration, irritation, and so forth. Notice how does it coincide with tension in your body, and then breathe right through that tension, and then bring your awareness and your fields right back into this lower center of your body, which is also called your lower dantian and TCM and in martial arts. So I thought that's a really interesting topic to share with you guys, to also give you an idea of why I focus on what I focus on in my practice. I always tell people, like, it's true, my focus is mental health and gut health, holistic detox, stress management, and dealing with trauma, as well as hormone balance and then reproductive or women's health. Not just women's health, but rather feminine embodiment and feminine empowerment, because we are all yin and yang, no matter what gender you're embodying, like physically in this lifetime. We still do have yin and yang, masculine and feminine aspects to ourselves that need to be in balance. But when I tell people those specifications, I sometimes feel like it might seem a little far away or detached from one another, but it's absolutely not. Like, mental health and gut health are directly related. What your digestion is doing directly reflects what's happening in your mind, and vice versa. And so if you want to dive a little bit deeper into this, not just a little bit, but like a freaking good bit deeper, and learn about what your own symptoms mean, what they are the messengers for, and how we can really help to recalibrate yourself holistically and thrive more by removing the roadblocks that are in between you and literally your highest potential, because your physical health impacts your mental health, impacts your emotional stability, and vice versa. So if you want to really dive deep into those things, then do reach out. There are plenty of ways to work with me. There are plenty of free resources that I offer for you to dive into as well. And I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and let me know what you think in our Facebook group, the State of Flow community Facebook group, with the hashtag podcast insight, and just share what you got out of this episode, or if you do have any questions. And I'm so glad I had you guys here today. I hope you're really enjoying the rest of your week, and I'll see you guys very soon. Beautiful, you people. And for all my YouTubers on here, if you want to go and dive a little bit deeper and you haven't seen yet, I've got this free juicy offering for you, which is the Elevate Your State webinar. It's free, like I just mentioned, and it really dives into how we can holistically amplify and elevate our state for you to thrive more in all areas of your life. It comes with a little special bonus from me, with me, and a worksheet to really allow you to get the most out of the process and most of what you're learning in the webinar, and not only leave it at information, but actually turn that into your personal transformation. All right, beautiful people, I send you loads of love. I would love to hear what you think. Comment below, and I'll see you soon.